Good morning, everyone. It's 10 a.m. and the hearing is now open. My name is Gemma Pannell and I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct this hearing. So can I check everyone can hear me? Hopefully you can with the microphone. Now, do I need to turn my microphone off in order for you to speak, or will this one, is this like a, you try?
Right. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I should be able to leave mine on. Okay, we'll see how we get on anyway. All right, if anyone has a mobile phone, can you please switch it off or at least turn it on to silent mode? Obviously, we've had the fire alarm. If it goes off again, obviously that would be for real. And we can see that fire exits are labelled, and hopefully the council would escort us out and take us to an assembly point. So I am appointed to determine the appeal by Long Term Land Limited for the development described as erection of up to 19 affordable homes with associated access, parking and landscaping, with all matters reserved except for means of access, at land at Cambridge Road, Stretham, CB6 3LW. And for clarity, the appeal relates to planning application reference 22-00180 OUM dated the 14th of February 2022. So can I confirm with everyone that that is the description of development and address as I've understood it? Yeah. Yes. So the purpose of the hearing today is to help me get the information I need to make my decision and for you to put forward your point of view. It will be a structured discussion based on the agenda which was circulated yesterday. Hopefully everyone's got a copy. Yeah. So we'll be working off that agenda. So I think there is a circulation list going around, an attendance list, sorry. So normally we don't ask for one of those now, but it is really helpful to me because I will still list your names at the bottom of the decision notice. So if you can fill it in, that would be great. But I'll just write down just so I've got who's who. Bear with me. Right, okay, so for the appellant side, please.
Madam, shall I start and introduce myself and those of my team who are likely to speak today?
Yes, please.
So I'm Andrew Tabachnik, KC. Surname is Tabachnik, but you've also got it hopefully at the end of the cost application that I hope has made it to you. So sitting immediately to my left is Chris Frost from the planning consultancy instructing me, and he's obviously dealing with planning matters. Next to him is Adam Bamford, who's dealing with noise and acoustic matters from Cass Allen, and who's responsible for the noise impact assessment that you will have seen in the papers. Next to him is Toby McCulloch, who's responsible for the design work, and in particular the design statement that was addressing reason 2. And I think it's the 4 of us that contributions will come from this morning.
So, and for the council, please.
So, Gavin Taylor, planning officer.
Yeah.
And then I have Chris Smith, environmental health officer.
Yeah.
And Simon Ellis, our planning manager.
And you're leading for your side?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, and then anyone at the back who's wanting to speak? No, just here to observe. Okay, that's absolutely fine. Just to let you know, I do have a colleague with me today who's sitting at the back of the room. She's not taking part, she's here to observe, and she won't be taking part in any of the decision-making process. So that's just to let you know. If anyone else does want to speak who hasn't let me know, then obviously please let me know and then I can take your name. Is there anyone here from the press? No. And then is anyone intending to film proceedings today? No. Okay. So I've seen a copy of the notification letter and that gives sufficient detail setting out the time and venue for the event. So I'm satisfied we can proceed on that basis. I've also been provided with copies of representations that were made to the council in response to both the planning application and the appeal, and I'll take these into account in my decision. Does everyone feel that they have had the opportunity to view those? Yeah. Okay. So obviously the site visit will take place after I've heard the evidence, and I think, and this will be later this afternoon. And it would appear that I can probably do that unaccompanied, but I don't know what parties' views are on that.
I think for our part, that would be entirely acceptable. We have.
You've got me a map, haven't you? With
We've
like a
provided
route.
Yes, a suggested walking route, obviously. It'll be a matter for you to what extent you want to follow that through. If you did follow it through completely, I don't think there's anything else that anyone suggested you need to see as well. The council has had it for a little while, and I think whether we can call this an agreed.
Yeah, that's just to get an
suggested
idea of the
route.
character, and I think you've made some points about different examples of terraces and things, haven't you, on there?
We have.
Yeah.
We have.
No, that's fine. Okay. Unless anything else comes up during today that leads me to consider otherwise, we will close the hearing here in the room. So discussions and questions on evidence will only take place in the room. So if you do wish to comment, please do so before we finish. Towards the end of the agenda, you'll note there is a scheduled discussion on planning conditions. For the benefit of those in attendance who are not familiar with standard practice in planning appeals, this gives the parties the opportunity to have a discussion on what conditions may be reasonable and necessary in the event of me deciding to allow the appeal. It does not in any way mean that I've made up my mind about the case, nor will the discussion affect the council's position in relation to it. So I have a list of conditions that were provided by the council. But there wasn't any in the statement of common ground. So is that an agreed list from the council? We haven't got another list.
There isn't another list. It's not entirely agreed.
Okay.
But the points of dispute are pretty limited,
Okay,
really.
which we can discuss. Yeah.
Which we can discuss. We've got one more suggested condition in respect of the passive house principles.
Okay. Yeah.
And one or two that we've got either a tweak or we're not clear as to the justification.
But I can work from those as when we get to
It's a
that
very
part.
limited series of points.
Okay. And I've been provided with the signed statement of common ground, which sets out the agreed points and the matters in dispute. And obviously those have framed the main issues that are part of the agenda. Looking at costs, I've got the appellant's application for costs and the council's response to it. And then also the council have made their own application for costs at the bottom of that response. So obviously there will be the opportunity for responses to that later. I don't know whether you've prepared anything in writing as to the response or.
I haven't, no,
No,
madam.
okay, so we'll
I'll
just do that
cover
verbally.
it orally.
Okay, that's fine. So all the documents relating to the evidence that has been provided should be with me. I'm not inviting any further evidence at this time, but if there is any to be submitted, now would be the time. I had a query about a planning obligation. I haven't got one.
Yes, there are going to be two planning obligations. One is a bilateral that's been agreed with the council in respect of affordable housing matters. That was all signed last week. I'm sorry that at least an electronic copy of that didn't make it to you. That's unfortunate. I'm sure we've got hard copies of them to hand over. Perhaps that was the approach. And then there's also going to be a unilateral in respect of some contributions, because there are questions as to whether those contributions comply with the SIL regulations. So there's going to be a discussion about that from our perspective.
Right, okay. But I haven't got a copy of that in terms of what, so is the copy that you've got, does that cover the matters that the council wanted, or it covers the matters as you see we should be considering them?
What it does is it covers the matters that in fact it's the council that wanted, but it's got a blue pencil provision as well. So that allows for the debate to occur. If you're not with us on the debate, then the obligation will take effect fully and the contributions will be payable exactly as requested.
So I haven't got a copy of that either, so I'll need to have a look at that.
Again, I'm sorry about that, madam. We
discuss that, probably need some time just to have a look at that, because I wasn't sure whether I was going to come today and you were going to just say, yeah, it's all agreed and it's signed, and because I hadn't heard anything. So
well, at least the very first obligation is agreed and signed. The second one, I think it's agreed as to its terms, but there's a question on SIL compliance to be discussed.
Right, okay. So yeah, if you've got a copy of that I can look at and go through that.
So maybe there'll be a break between items 3 and 4 on the
or we can have a break. Yeah, that's fine. But nothing else. Nobody else. You didn't want to put anything else.
Well, there were some plans circulated over the last
Yesterday, yeah,
couple of days.
I've got those.
If you've got those and those are, as it were, absorbed within your comments and
Mhm.
material that you've received, then there's nothing additional to that.
Yeah, my understanding was the council were happy that you'd had them and that they were before me, is that right? They're illustrative, aren't they? So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
thank
that's
you,
fine.
madam.
Okay. Right, so moving on to talk about the plans. Obviously, it was made in outline the application with means of access to be considered and all other matters of detail reserved for future consideration. Can you just confirm that that is correct? Yeah. So with the plans, I've obviously got the list that was provided. But I think in terms of what would be a formal plan, it would just be the location plan, D1000 revision 02. Because from what I could see, the rest were all illustrative unless there's something else with regard to the access.
I think 5.3 of the SOCG, madam. I think the intention behind that was to list the plans that are effectively application plans, given the means of access point, and it's plan 4 Rev B.
Yeah. So that's what I've got, 02 location plan.
Yeah.
And then 04 Rev. Is that in the transport statement or is it a separate drawing?
No, it came subsequent to the transport station statement because there was a bit of discussion, and then it's slightly later than that and was agreed subsequent to the initial document. You should have it in. I'm sure you've got it in the appeal papers somewhere.
Yeah, I'm just.
I had it behind a separate tab in the papers that arrived with me. We'll see if we've got an extra copy of.
That's fine. I can have a look. I haven't got one printed, but it's probably not something we need to. I just want to double check I've got it.
I'm afraid the only one that I've got immediately to hand I've annotated.
Let's just have a look and see what I've got in here for. 4B, is it? Is that what you just said? Yeah, 04B. Yeah, I have got that. Okay, and then obviously there's a lot of other plans, and as we've just mentioned, some that were submitted yesterday. But as it's an outline application, any details on those drawings relating to landscaping, layout, scale and appearance would be illustrative only. So that was how I would be dealing with it. Okay. So we're always supposed to set out the timings. I always think it's almost impossible. So we will have a break probably at lunchtime, but if people want to break before, then obviously just let me know. And then I'm hoping obviously that we'd finish no later than 4, probably earlier than that. And then obviously, as I said, I'd adjourn for the gala close, and then we'll have the site visit, which we'll talk about later. Does anyone have any questions about the procedural side of today's hearing or anything I've talked about so far? No. Okay, so the agenda sets out what I regard to be the main issues in the determination of this appeal, which you will see as from the agenda as whether the proposed noise mitigation measures result in an acceptable level of amenity to future occupiers with particular regard to natural ventilation and the effect of the development on the character and appearance of the area. I'll have some questions that I'll ask of both the appellant and the council, which will lead on from these issues. And they will come in due course. But at the moment, does anyone disagree or have any comments on those main issues? No. During the discussion, I'll invite contributions from one side and then the other in response. If anyone wishes to make a point or feel I'm moving on before you've said all you want to, then please tell me. I have been provided with and read all the written statements, so there's no need to repeat material that is covered by them, although by all means refer to relevant sections to illustrate a point you may be making on something specific. And equally, I may ask a question which you feel has been covered in the evidence, but that will be just so that I can explore those issues. Whilst the proceedings here are a structured and formal discussion, it's not a public inquiry, and as such, there'll be no formal presentation of case or cross-examination unless I specifically agree to it. And finally, if you do want to make a point or respond to something that's been said, please wait until the party speaking has finished doing so and then attract my attention. But we're in a small room, so that shouldn't be too difficult anyway. Right, so moving on to the main issues relating to the noise mitigation measures. And my first question would be probably to the council, but why do you consider the, let's get this right, mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, why do you consider that to be unacceptable?
Yeah, thank you. So obviously the application that was before us to determine categorically set out that the scheme would rely entirely on a closed window system with MVHR. The council considered sort of having regard to its previous approach, as well as sort of appeal decisions which sort of back the approach up, is that essentially, in order to achieve suitable or acceptable internal noise levels, it's necessary to keep windows closed, which the council considers creates an isolating environment for future occupiers. And obviously, whilst it's recognised that MVHR achieves the necessary noise reduction, nonetheless, the lack of option to open windows without noise interference is not deemed to be an appropriate means. Obviously, I say that on the basis that the application that was before the council was, as I say, categorically based on 100% sealed windows and MVHR. And I appreciate that's perhaps moved on a bit, albeit only in outline, indicatively. That's moved on a bit now. But obviously the reason for refusal was for the wholesale use of MVHR.
Okay. So the council's view is it's unacceptable as a means of mitigation because you have to have because of the fact that you would keep the windows closed.
Yeah, because of the lack of choice about whether or not you can open windows to naturally ventilate should you wish to connect to the outside world, without experiencing noise levels in excess of standards.
Yeah, so obviously I'm going to come on to ask about what the benefits of it, but sort of, I think because you've mentioned the revised plans, I mean, obviously, or the revised, it's not the plans as such as it is the update to the noise impact assessment, I think is probably what we've had through the appeal, which confirmed that 30 to 50% of the development could achieve reasonable noise levels with the rear elevation windows open. And I would like to understand what is meant by reasonable noise levels. But for the purposes of the appeal and my determination of the application, my understanding is that we are now at a point which says that some of the windows could be open at ground and first floor. Is that correct?
Yes. So the updated noise impact assessment provided by Cass Allen, it indicates now that the development could potentially come forward with some windows being openable without exceeding standards. Obviously, as referred to in the statements, the various statements have come and gone. I think it's acknowledged that there is quite a number of instances on that modelling where what Cass Allen has referred to marginal compliance is achieved, which actually exceeds the 5.
I want to go through that because that's what I
exceeds the 5 dB buffer,
okay.
Which obviously is a desirable buffer because of the nature of the development, in our opinion. But it obviously even exceeds that. So the council does have concerns that there is quite a significant reliance on this marginal exceedance of the standards that are set.
Well, I suppose that it comes down to the noise impact assessment looks at what you would do with windows shut. And I think it's agreed that there's compliance with windows shut,
Yes.
as you would have in this, I'm going to keep getting it wrong, the MVHR.
Yes.
That the whole point of that is you would have windows shut, isn't it? That system. But the
yeah.
council's view is that you should have the option to be able to open a window. And if the window is open, and we can sort of pin this down a bit, but there may be some marginal exceedance, and that's your point, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the concern.
Okay. So I think what would be helpful then is if, so where it says achieve reasonable noise levels, I think what I wasn't 100% clear about is then looking at that appendix 6, where you are with the, it might just be helpful for someone to take me through that, because I've obviously looked at what Cass Allen have put in. And then when I get to paragraph 5.31 of that report, it says detailed open window calculations have been carried out for both the linear and staggered terrace options for ground floor and first floor. Full calculations are in appendix 6. And then you provide a summary, which talks about the 2 different options. And then it talks about at least reasonable internal noise levels. And I wanted to know if that was the noise levels that are referenced, which is the acoustic design criteria at 5.17, which is 35 dB and 40 dB in living and dining rooms, and then as it's set out on there. So is that what we're saying is reasonable?
The answer to that last question is no.
Right, okay, so
is defined as those standards plus defined even allowance. So reasonable is those numbers plus 5.
so you can be a bit higher than those numbers then. So it would then be like 40 dB and 45. Yeah. So reasonable is a standard plus the 5 dB. Yeah, okay.
And if you're now turning to me to respond to the council's points, can I make a few other observations including that plus 5?
Yes, okay.
So I'll come back to the plus 5 and the marginal compliance point that the council has just raised. The short answer on that is that we do rely on the plus 5, but the council has accepted, and we show the officer report, that the plus 5 is permissible in accordance with guidance to be taken into account because of the benefits of the scheme. On the marginal compliance question, the council is not correct. What appendix 6 shows, and I'll take you through this next about it, point out anything I've got wrong with is that every unit in the illustrative scheme, I'll just show you one.
Yeah.
Every unit has at least one facade where you can open all the windows, ground and first, day and night, without reliance on marginal compliance.
Okay.
There might be some additional facades where you could also open the windows and still achieve the levels with marginal compliance. But every unit will have at least one facade in all windows, and you hit the reasonable standard which the council accepts as the appropriate standard here inside, even with the windows open. And so that's the bottom line point. Just a few introductory comments. Just know where we can go in terms of the very, very briefly, because I know you read the papers there. The starting point is what is government policy on this? The government policy is absolutely clear. The MVHR solutions are entirely acceptable. We're not in a world where, despite the housing crisis in the country and the affordable housing crisis in this district, it no longer allows building houses proximate to busy roads.
Mhm.
And the government has endorsed the solution as a matter of principle. That's absolutely clear from the energy laws and the various professional standards that were the first British standard document in 1853 and the refugee document effectively so that's the starting point. That is the policy that's acceptable in principle. The council's statement of case to the acknowledges that they have consented anyway or elsewhere
Mhm.
in the script. Also, which understand why this about this scheme, particularly where the concern that they have raised about you can't open any windows, you don't even have that on, is just not correct. In fact, because as you've seen, the material, you can design this works that,
Mhm.
and you can meet the reasonable standard that they tell us they want to see us meeting the scheme. So that's, as I say, that's the policy position, and you'll hear from Mr. Brown that this is now very, very
Mhm.
One point putting all of the HR here, it's not just about the noise issue, it's also to embed the entrance statements and crossing.
We're going to come on to that about passive house. Yeah, I've got some questions about that. So
Yes, absolutely. But it's say it's bound up with the noise because the whole objective is that you keep the windows closed to secure air time.
Yeah.
In order to get all those benefits.
Yeah.
Well, I don't need to.
no, we'll come on to that point because I want to explore that bit as well. So that's fine.
Yes.
So do you want to just so that when I look at this appendix 6, I just kind of want to understand, because obviously there's lots of red and I was like, what does the red mean?
Yes. I think that the easiest way to do it might be, and say you can do this exercise with the later ones, but if I just show you how I'll try and explain it.
Yeah.
If you've got the first page of the option,
Yeah.
but it's only a 17-unit scheme, but
Yeah.
18 to 19 back, so
Okay.
easier to do. And if I just show you ground floor calculations.
Yeah, so option 1, linear terrace daytime ground floor calculations. That's what I've got open. Yeah.
So plots 1 to 5. If you see that that's what all the stars mentioned, and then it gives you an external noise level and the internal noise level. That's on the basis of open windows.
That's on the basis of opened windows.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
And obviously with a closed window.
That makes more sense now when I look at the figures, because
Yes,
yeah.
I think the closed window noise position inside is taken as read.
Yeah, okay.
It's absolutely never disputed that
It would meet it. Yeah.
Construction method products for your windows. There's no reason why you can't get miles below any set. That's very easily achievable. So what this is showing is what's the facade level. So let's take, for example, the west facade, 54. Right. So plots 1 to 5. That's
Yeah.
That's the back.
That's the back. Yeah.
So internal noise level, 39 is given. So that is windows open. Your open window scenario broadly agreed is giving significant degree of attenuation. So that's where you get 39 from. And then your second outcome is put in the orange band, like.
Yeah.
And although if you look at the key at the bottom, the orange band is defined as 37 to 42. Okay. Which is effectively 35 plus a 2 for marginal compliance plus the 5. Okay. That's the range of it. The reality is, if you just take this scenario, that you're at 39 inside the house, and that is below our target of 40.
Yeah, so the target, and I go back to that. Yeah. So it would be, yeah, average noise levels in living rooms and dining rooms, 35 to 40, or bedrooms is 35 to 30, and then I can add the 5 onto that.
Yeah, well, the third for the bedrooms, 35 is fine. The 35 is during the day.
Yeah.
Less. And the
30 is at night.
is at night.
Mhm.
So there's a different take for nighttime levels.
Mhm.
And although obviously 39 wouldn't be.
Yeah, because this is
that's
daytime.
fine. When you look at the nighttime ones, we get the lower.
Yeah. Okay.
If I just stick with the option 1, page that I was taking you through, instead of speed on the rest of it. So then if you look at plot 6 to 7, you've got the upper facade, which is described as west, northwest. You can see the internal level again, the basis I've explained, windows open in the hat room, and you're at 37. So your target is 40. So none of this is dependent on the +2 on lines.
Right, okay.
You can do this exercise. I'll do it very quick. How it's plot 8. We've got the north facade is at 38. Plots 9 to 10, you drop down to the west facade, that is at 33. Plot 11, the west facade is at 35. Plots 11 to 12, west facade at 32. Plot 14 has got the west facade at 38. And it's also dependent on the facade at 42. So that's as it were an addition.
Okay, yeah, no, that's helpful. Yeah.
And then as I say, I wouldn't take up time to think through the rest.
No, that's fine. I can understand it now. That was all I needed, was just to make sure I could understand what that meant and how that affected that. So were there certain points in that document that the council had a concern where you said, I think you've said there's a significant reliance on marginal?
Yeah, thank you. So I think it was really referencing the fact that we've got an application for, up to 19 dwellings, and the 19 dwellings that are shown on the staggered option 2 staggered terrace daytime. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those plots where we have either significant observable adverse effects or the marginal exceedance, marginal compliance, where essentially you don't have the standard, it exceeds the standard on several of those plots. So obviously
On all facades though, or just?
So if you look at, so if we go to option 2, staggered terrace.
Daytime or?
Staggered terrace daytime first floor
First floor.
calculations.
Okay,
So it's not got a page number, I don't think.
no. I think this is the one here, isn't it? Okay.
I think it's essentially the second option 2 page.
Yeah, okay, and it highlights, so there, and it's got on there for me that there's a marginal compliance.
So if you look at, so if you look at plots 3, plot 4, plot 5, plots 6 and 7, all across those plots, you have essentially exceedance of standards on all facades, and that is for the 19 dwellings. I appreciate that the first one was for 17 on a sort of a linear terrace sort of style, but so I think that in terms of sort of demonstrating that the quantum is achievable, the council has concerns that actually the evidence would indicate that it's only achievable with exceedance of the standards. And that would also apply to the nighttime first floor calculations on those staggered terraces.
Okay.
Lateral.
Yeah.
Yep. Very, very quickly. Option 1 shows you how on the terrace properties nearest to the road, you can achieve a flat facade which fully meets our standards without relying on one of the
Mhm.
There's no big point arising out of the fact that option 1 is 17 units and option 2 is 19 units. If you look, please, at the different layouts that that show the different options. All that option 2 has done is it added additional options at the back, the ones further away from the room. And those are not the ones that require, as it were.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So there's no, we could easily.
I think so. What I'm understanding is there's a difference between the compliance with option 1 and option 2. We're mainly talking about the terrace at the front, aren't we, in terms of the concerns? So, and the council's point is that with option 2, there's more reliance on the marginal compliance, whereas option 1, as you've set out, doesn't.
Putting it like that, is absolutely fair.
Right.
In relation to the
Yeah.
We come up with staggered terrace with use trying to persuade.
Yeah, that's more on your second issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not something we can. Yes.
Okay. So then I wanted to talk about then the relationship between the proposal being passive house development and the use of the mechanical ventilation and heat recovery, because I think there is a relationship between the two. So do you want to set that out for me?
Yes, well, you're absolutely right, madam. There's a fundamental interrelationship. Even if we were miles away from any road and we were putting in passive house, you would have exactly the same, as it were, knock-on acoustic benefits, depending on what window product you chose. But all the energy benefits are derivable from reducing the amount of airflow or sort of open, broad, uncontrolled airflow between inside and outside, and having it go through the various ducts and the heat exchangers when it's appropriate, or reverse heat exchangers in the summer to maintain pleasant internal conditions. All those sorts of things are a fundamental part of the passive house principles, which the evidence indicates results in energy savings of around 90% or so. And there's absolutely an interrelationship, because, as I say, the whole point is keep your windows closed as much as possible in order to enjoy the energy benefits. And anybody choosing to move into these properties and understanding what product they're moving in with and what the energy implications are for them will understand that. So there absolutely is an interrelationship, and we don't think that that's been fully taken on board in terms of the balance and the various considerations about a need or an option to open one's window, even if that were a relevant consideration.
So it's sort of actively discouraged, isn't it, to open a window with that system?
Effectively, if you're putting up a banner to people, you would say, you can open your window, here's a quiet facade that we've designed for you. But if you do, it'll cost you money,
yeah,
and you'll be losing out on the energy benefits.
Do you want to come back on that point?
Yeah, I think the council has acknowledged in their officer report the benefits of passive house standard, passive house design. But obviously the concern rested with the option, the ability, and I appreciate those, those that have, those in a passive house may not wish or need to open a window very often, if at all. But for the council, it's considered that it should be an option to have the freedom to do so. without sort of reliance on that sealed sort of environment. But yeah, I think the council has recognised quite clearly and balanced, particularly in their officer report, the benefits of passive house and the potential energy savings with the sort of disbenefits of relying on it in order to mitigate noise.
Yeah, so you said it is a recognised and sustainable means of building, effectively recycling and recirculating air. But then you've said whilst it would be designed to passive house principles, it would still be reasonable to provide the option to open windows. I think it's just understanding in terms of the passive house principle is that you have a sealed system.
I think it's the principle. I think it's the principle, but I don't think there's a difference in terms of achieving sort of high amenity value in terms of the options. If people want to naturally open a window because the exterior climate is just right for them, they don't actually need to rely on air circulation, which obviously you can switch that off and actually rely on natural ventilation if you wish. It's the lack of option in doing so that is the concern for the council.
So you think that a passive house design would fail to achieve a high quality living environment for future occupiers?
I think a passive house design without the option, without noise interference, would fail to achieve a high standard of amenity.
Can you just repeat that? Passive house without noise interference?
A passive house without the option to open windows, without undue noise interference, fail to achieve a high standard of amenity.
I'm going to let you come back, but I just want to follow that up because obviously then obviously looking at the evidence, the application was accompanied by the energy and sustainability strategy. So that talks about well-designed homes with vastly reduced energy bills, a next generation home, precision engineered, superior build fabric, smart home technology, energy efficiency, water conservation as standard. So what weight should I give those conclusions of that strategy?
I mean, that should be given a substantial weight in view of the energy reduction.
So you recognise that is a principle, that it would be a well-designed home with vastly reduced energy bills?
Yes.
Okay, do you want to come back now on what we've heard?
Well, Madam, simply to state obviously what's implicit from what's just been said, that there's a clear contradiction in the council's position, and essentially you're getting lip service paid to these energy benefits, but in reality they take away with the other hand. I mean, it was quite revealing for the council to say you may not need to open a window very often. I mean, why are we here? You've probably seen in the evidence as well that the registered provider who's backing this scheme, Stonewater, passive house is their preferred building method now throughout the country, because they recognise that there's a climate crisis to be addressed. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. So, and then I just wanted to have a look at what the policies say. So I think in EMB2, the preamble to that, I think I've highlighted. Where have I written this? So it says, that's set out in the, so sustainable construction principles and methods, which I think is set out in the preamble. Yeah, So in 6.3.3 of EMV2, it talks about addressing the impacts of development on climate change. Good design can reduce energy consumption and improve sustainability through mitigation. Will actively promote development incorporating new technology that promotes energy and water conservation. And then it talks about further details as set out in policy EMV4. Doesn't seem that you have referred to policy EMV4 in the refusal or.
But the refusal reason centres around visual amenity through the terracing and
Well, I think in terms of the first reason, so I think the first reason for refusal says it fails to provide a high quality living environment contrary to policy EMV2. So EMV2 says all development will be designed to be high quality, enhancing and complementing local distinctiveness, which obviously we'll come on to look at in the second reason. It then talks about the council will encourage innovative, creative, good modern architectural design that complies with the principles set out below. And one of those are that it would incorporate the sustainable construction principles and methods contained in policy EMV4. So do I need to have regard to that?
Well, I mean, obviously, in terms of sort of our position, we've acknowledged the benefits of passive house design, and obviously we would support that. But obviously, there are also wider considerations at stake in terms of residential amenity. In terms of EMV4, it would be a policy driver for conditions should it be necessary to secure passive house design if the weight is given to that. But in terms of sort of our situation, it's that we've acknowledged that there are benefits.
So there is, in terms of like conflict with the policy, your position is there is a conflict with part of the policy which requires occupiers to enjoy high standards of amenity, but equally there's elements of it that there is compliance because it would incorporate sustainable construction principles presumably, which are then linked to EMV4. So I know obviously it talks about code for sustainable homes, but I mean, it does talk about maximising energy efficiency, which I think we've agreed passive house standards do.
Yes, we would say that it sort of complies with the aims of EMV4 and obviously that part of EMV2.
So I think just continuing to look at EMV2, how do you define what is a high standard of amenity?
Well, obviously EMV2 obviously sets out sort of obviously various considerations, but in terms of sort of a high standard of amenity, it's how the properties and the surroundings are experienced by individual residents. It goes so far as to sort of building communities, etc. But I think for the purposes of the individual homes here, it's about the freedom to sort of utilise your property as you see fit.
That's not set out anywhere in the policy, though, is it?
It's not. No, it's not. Amenity is not defined in the glossary to the local plan.
No, I'm just wondering what the what is the bar for a high standard?
It's not explicitly set out anywhere.
So it's just an interpretation. So you would interpret that means freedom to utilise your property.
Yeah, and obviously in the context of this application, it's considered that the amount of noise interference or the amount of noise that exists and the necessary mitigation would not achieve that high standard of amenity.
Well, obviously you've accepted that there's an acceptable level of amenity with the mitigation. This is about the amenity from a lack of being able to open the windows.
That's correct.
Yeah. Want to come back on any of that?
Just a couple of observations, if I may, Madam. Firstly, I was going to come back on, but I think you're on to this already, that the council do accept that with the windows closed and MVHR operational, that the environment inside will not just be acceptable in noise terms, but it'll be acceptable in atmospheric and ventilation and fresh air and however you want to put it terms. And they say that expressly in the officer report. So this isn't, as you've observed or questioned the council about whether people will or won't have acceptable internal conditions. It's not disputed in any way that they will. As I think the council is now conceding, really its only point that it's got left is to say that this is about having an option to effectively defeat in some way the low energy benefits that they would otherwise have. And we've already been through that. I'm not going to repeat those points other than to say, firstly, of course, that the not having an option point ignores what we went through at the beginning about Appendix 6. And secondly, the low energy benefit points and EMV4 that you were putting to the council, that's all been reinforced, of course, by later editions of the framework, in particular paras 152, 158 of the framework, which are very, very clear that encouragement is given to low energy.
Give me those paragraphs again.
152 and 158.
Thank you.
Are the particular ones to have a look at. There's a whole chapter on low energy schemes and the climate crisis that we must all be dealing with. And as I say, that reinforces, and I would suggest adds more weight to those considerations insofar as you find yourself balancing those points against any point of the council that you do think requires some sort of balance. And then the third observation I'd make relates to those last comments made about people should have the right to use their property as they see fit. If they want to open a window and cost themselves money and so on, they should be allowed to do that and all the rest of it. I think that actually there's a broader question on choice here. And the question should start from a wider panorama, and it should be, is there actually anything inherently unacceptable about this proposal so that people should not have the choice to elect for one of these homes if they want? That's really where we're at. If you say that people should not even be given the choice to have these homes, of course, I understand you'll refuse the scheme. But what on earth is the basis for us being there in respect of affordable homes, which everybody agrees are massively required in this district and in this particular part of the district? Is the option to open your window despite all that we've gone through something that should allow the planning system to take away that choice from people who may not have the same reaction to possible noise issues as some of the council officers and may be very happy just to get themselves in a house in an area where they want to live? Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. We could pick up on that point because I was just going to talk about that. I think there's been some points on both sides about whether or not the occupiers would have a choice about residing in the properties. So I think I've had different sort of things put to me about that. So it might just be helpful just to articulate those for me.
Yes, if I could. So my understanding is that the council's statutory duty is to obviously find accommodation for those not currently in accommodation. And the statutory duty is to provide one offer of a property. If that is not accepted, then that individual is, well, the council would have met their statutory duty. And therefore, that if that property is not accepted, my understanding is that the council's met its statutory duty and therefore no longer needs to prioritise that individual for.
Is that the same as if they go through a bidding process?
That I'm not certain of. That was just what I got from our housing team last week in terms of our statutory duty. So I'm afraid I can't expand on that anymore.
Okay, I don't know, you might.
I'm afraid we don't think that that's right. The way this works is when a property becomes available, people are on the list are invited to bid for it, and the only people who bid are people who have done their homework, one assumes, done their due diligence, and know that they're interested. But beyond that, the only powers actually for the council to remove people from the list or not accommodate them anymore, or if people act unreasonably in relation to their choices. Now, the council's attitude for purposes of this appeal makes it rather difficult for the council to say that if somebody did say, I don't want to have a house without that option, that the council would regard that as an unreasonable refusal. But obviously that's not the same as saying that others who would regard it as a reasonable situation should be denied the choice.
Because is it that they're, I think when I've looked at I can't remember, I've read something, but is it that they're only being offered on a local need, like certain people? Where did I read that? Was that in your officer report? Something about the process? I think there's mention of 2 villages somewhere. Maybe it's in the housing officer's comments. Everyone's looking blank.
If I can jump in, I think it's Stretham and Wilburton. It was the sort of the scope for the housing needs. So as long as I think we would seek to secure accommodation for residents related or linked to those 2 settlements, is my understanding.
Yes, obviously the
So it could be
application.
people that aren't in the highest level of need then, because they'd need a local connection. So it'd be people that have a local connection to those areas who would then be able to bid for those properties.
That is potentially correct. I perhaps need to refresh my memory on the 106 that's been drafted, because I think that may have sort of nomination.
Yeah, there's a nomination agreement.
Yeah, there'll be a cascade mechanism
Right,
as well.
yeah.
And so it'll go initially to those in local need. And I would assume those in priority local need at the top of the list, then
Yes.
those in local need. And then if the units aren't filled, it'll go more broadly to the rest of the councils.
So there is likely to be an element of choice then, presumably, because there could be a range of people who would meet that criteria, or as you say, that's the purpose of having it with the nomination agreement, is that they'll be offered, won't they? First to the people that are in local need, high priority, then local need, and work their way down.
Yes, I mean, I say the response I got, you know,
I think it said there was like somewhere about how much need it was, like so many, wasn't there, on the list?
yeah, I think we were satisfied there's an identified need that this development would
I think
assist
it's
with.
just sort of linking it to this point about choice. Let me just.
Yeah, there's
read my-
970 or so on the district list.
Yeah, but I think even on the,
Even on the local list,
Local,
it's
I think-
45 or so.
yeah, there we go. I had read it. So mirrors the findings from the housing needs assessment undertaken in the parishes of Little Thetford and Stretham. So yeah, I think I had seen something about the numbers.
The numbers are in the housing needs assessment that we put in
That's-
application
yeah.
stage. And as I say, the headline numbers are that the council's affordable housing list, at least as at the moment that document was put in, would just short of 1,000, 950, 970 or so. And that the number of people who had indicated they wanted a property in these parishes was about 45, I think. And the point of the housing needs assessment was to point out that that was essentially in complete agreement with its conclusions that local need was at 44. But beyond that, there's obviously the point about past delivery, but I imagine that's a topic 3 point.
Yeah.
But those are the current need figures that I'm aware of from the papers.
But your view is that if you offered it to one of those people in local priority need and they said we don't want to live there, then they'd come off the list?
Yeah, I think the sort of the basic message received was that sort of anyone they're working with under a sort of a homeless application.
Yeah, so that's if they've got a homeless application.
They get one offer of accommodation. If they refuse it, then the council withdraws their duty.
So presumably it could be someone who's living in private rented or who has a need and is on the list, but isn't necessarily homeless.
Yeah, except there's a range of different people in different
So I
circumstances.
think there's different statutory duties, isn't there, in terms of if you're homeless and then.
Yeah, I would have thought there would be.
Yeah, okay. I don't know that I'm any clearer, but I think.
Well, I think our absolutely clear position is that this begins with a bidding process.
I think
And
so.
there's a very large number of people
Who will
were
bid and
potential.
then, yeah, that. My previous.
And I think that's our position in relation to the availability and therefore the choice issue.
Okay. And then I was going to look at, so the council has submitted a number of other appeal decisions, and I know that you've gone through those as well. The question that I had was, did any of those appeals propose the dwellings to be passive house?
Not that I can recall now.
No, so they were just standard dwellings. Is there anything else you want to highlight about those? Like I said, I've seen that you've gone through them anyway, and I've got them, but was there anything in particular you wanted to pick out?
No, I've put my representations in the
Okay.
cost submissions. And
Yeah.
I don't think I need to add to that.
That's fine. So we've covered that. Right, so I just wanted to confirm in the appellant statement at 7.31, I think you've said within the guidance, it sets out that closed windows are an appropriate form of mitigation. Now, I had a look through this pro PG planning and noise, and I could see at 2.33, it talked about residents valuing the ability to open windows at will for a variety of reasons. Designers should aim through the use of good acoustic design to achieve internal noise level guidance with windows open. But yeah, it was just that point. I just wanted to know where that comes from, just so I could refer back to it. So it was 7.31 of your statement.
Yes, I would assume that the starting point for that is the PPG, which I think we've also provided.
Yeah, so I think it says national guidance pro PG recognises closed windows and alternative ventilation to be an appropriate method. So I just wanted to know where
Where in pro
in
PG?
there. I mean,
Yes.
I've only skim read it, so I might.
Yes.
I thought someone might just say yes. It's in this section.
Yes, the answer is to that specific question then a couple of pages before. Page 13 of the document. And what you've got there is essentially the same table as appears in BS 8233 with a few comments as well. And if you drop down to note 5, and obviously this isn't looking at passive house,
No.
but nonetheless. So note 5, designing site layout and dwelling so the internal target can be achieved with windows open. As many properties as possible demonstrates good acoustic design. Then it goes on, where it's not possible to meet internal target levels with windows open, internal noise levels can be assessed with windows closed. Any facade openings used to provide whole dwelling ventilation, assessed in the open position, and so on. And obviously it wouldn't say that if that wasn't a permissible and acceptable route. So that I think is the point that was being made about pro PG as such, but
So it's not quite what it says. It's just saying that you can do the assessment with the windows closed.
yes, but there's no point doing the assessment with the windows closed if that wouldn't be an acceptable solution as a matter of principle. That's the point.
Okay. Do you want to say anything on that point?
No, I think we've sort of acknowledged pro PG guidance in the throughout. So I think we're happy with that in terms of not wanting to comment further.
Okay. So that was all the questions that I had on noise. So is anyone else wanting to say anything on that point? Yeah.
I was just going to say, on the way in today, I actually passed the site as I was driving in, and I was just going to draw your attention when you do your site visit, the houses to the north, immediately to the high street, actually have today, or did when I was going past, open windows facing directly onto the facade. Now, I don't know for sure, but I very much doubt they have MVHR as well. So they do have habitable rooms that are going on. So if it were deemed unacceptable, the council has granted permission for those houses to be built previously. And clearly,
What age are those houses then?
they are probably quite old.
Yeah.
But in this case, obviously, we're putting forward a solution whereby they wouldn't need to open windows onto that elevation and they would still achieve reasonable.
I mean, I think there's always going to be cases where people will live near a road and they'll find it
Yes.
quite happy. They'll quite happily open the window
Yeah.
and it's road noise. But obviously what we've got to do is make sure it's appropriate within accordance with the guidance. And I would imagine that when those houses were built, probably that guidance wasn't in place maybe.
No, I agree entirely.
Okay, anything else from the council?
No.
No? Okay, right. Are we okay to carry on with character and appearance, or does anyone want a break? Yeah, okay. Right. So I think as set out, the council indicate that the arrangement of dwellings as indicated on the illustrative plans would fail to complement and enhance the local distinctiveness of the area. So if we can sort of go on to outline that, but in the first instance, I had a look at policy EMV1, and that refers to the character areas defined in the Cambridgeshire landscape guidelines. Is that a relevant document? And do I need a copy of it?
No, I don't think it's relevant for the purposes of this.
It's not relevant, so it doesn't set out sort of about a character. You know, sometimes it gives a baseline of a character area and then you work from that.
Not for this area.
Okay. So that even though it's in the policy, in the opening, should be informed by, sympathetic to and respect the distinctive character areas defined in the Cambridgeshire landscape guidelines. Is it that document's been superseded or?
No, I think really it's obviously the purpose of EMV1 is to sort of protect the character of the countryside essentially. So it's perhaps not always applicable in its entirety in terms of protecting countryside. I think what we found with this particular application that, given that we've got built form on either side of the development site, that it would be unlikely to result in any significant harm in.
So the guidelines are only appropriate in rural areas, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think yeah, absolutely. I think they're more relevant to sort of more open, much more open areas.
Okay. So, and then I wanted to know which of the bullet points of EMV1 does the proposal conflict with? So, because it talks about, so it'd be demonstrate that their form, presumably, and design will create positive complementary relationships with existing development. And then it goes on to say, and will protect, conserve, and where possible, enhance. So which of those bullet points is there a conflict with, if any?
I think with EMV1, I think it's perhaps just sort of public amenity from a visual point of view.
So public amenity and access?
Yeah, I think that's really probably where that is sort of the only applicable. Obviously, I think it's perhaps more relevant to two.
Well, it's just
obviously
whether or
requires-
not for the purpose of this policy, I
Yeah.
need to consider whether it protects, conserves and enhances. So does the site at the moment perform a role for public amenity? That
it's-
means it therefore needs to be protected and conserved.
I think at the moment, obviously it's an area of open agricultural field with a hedge running on the front side of it, which sort of indicates perhaps a bit more of a rural transition from the main settlement into the sort of the open countryside area. But as I said, it's
Yeah, I think just
sat between
focusing on
built-
EMV1, that I just want to be really clear, looking at EMV1. So is it just that for the purposes of EMV1, it needs to demonstrate that its form and design will create a positive complementary relationship with existing development? Or is there also the need for it to protect, conserve and enhance one of those bullet points?
No, I think the council were content with obviously built form in that location, but it's just obviously the relationship with the existing development along that part of.
Yeah, but that's EMV2,
Streetham.
isn't it? Not EMV1.
Well, it is, but obviously it's referenced in EMV1 also, so hence the reference to that in that part.
So you've said it doesn't need to be informed by the guidelines, so that first paragraph doesn't apply. So then when we look at the second paragraph, it's the form and design, which is illustrative at the moment, that you're saying fails to create a positive complementary relationship with existing development, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah.
And none of those bullet points underneath apply. We then go into EMV2.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Right, okay. So did you want to say anything about EMV1 before I move on to EMV2?
Well, just in one sentence, the bit that the council has now limited itself to in EMV1, positive complementary relationships with existing development. I mean, that's about how any scheme would relate to the immediately surrounding properties, the barns that you'll see, the houses to the north and so on. And that isn't what their purported concern is at all.
Well, I thought that it was a terrace type development would not be complementary to existing development. Is that
Well,
not the council's point?
complementary relationships with existing development, as I say, that's essentially how does it relate to its immediate neighbours? That's the question that's being asked. I'm not going to suggest that question doesn't arise under EMV2, but I don't think it arises under EMV1 for what that's worth.
Okay, and then. So I think EMV2, I was clearer on that because that talks about complementing local distinctiveness, which is what's referenced. And then it talks about design which fails to have regard to local context, does not take advantage of opportunities to preserve, enhance or enrich the character and appearance quality of the area will not be acceptable. And then I looked at the larger part of that policy which we've already touched upon, where it talks about all new development proposals will be expected to. Oh no, that was the other reason, wasn't it? So was there anything in there? Ensure that the layout, scale, form, massing relates sympathetically to the surrounding area and each other. Would that be?
Yes, that's the key one. Obviously, the first bullet point, obviously making efficient use of land, but whilst respecting density, urban and village character. And obviously, there is no. I think we've agreed there's no sort of set character to Stretham. It's sort of, but obviously, as the council sort of raised the immediate character of the location there and the surroundings, it's not considered that the terracing would conform to that. So that first bullet point, and then also the fifth bullet point.
So it doesn't make efficient use of the land.
Well, it's a two-part, isn't it? It's make efficient use of land while respecting. So I
I
think,
suppose I would think that would be more about when you talk about like an overdevelopment of the site, which I don't think you've said, have you?
no, I mean, arguably it sort of repeats that fifth bullet point in part, I guess. So the fifth bullet point is the main
Yeah, I would
criteria.
have thought that would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And do you think, because obviously then if I look at policy HOU4, that's a slightly different test. So that talks about no significant harm would be caused to the character or setting of the settlement and the surrounding countryside. So does the council consider that the development would result in significant harm? It's not referenced, I don't think, in your reason for refusal.
No, I think ultimately we've said it carries negative weight because of the design. I don't think we've.
No, is there I want to know, is there a conflict with policy HOU4?
No, I wouldn't say it causes significant harm.
So no significant harm. The character and setting, that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So do you think that policy EMV1 and EMV2 set out a higher bar than that which is required by HOU4?
Yeah, I think the essentially the affordable housing exception site policy is for rural development where it sits outside of a framework and obviously has to therefore capture a range of environments. So what we class as true open countryside potentially, and
it
I think
it applies to this site, doesn't it?
it does apply to this site indeed, but I think in terms of the way that the policy attempts to capture all the different scenarios because of the site, as I say, and it's right on the edge of the settlement. It's only just outside the framework. I think we'd all agree, and therefore it doesn't.
So I don't know, because if I
conflict.
follow that point, you're saying, oh, if it was in the open countryside, it could be more harmful, but because it's adjacent to the settlement, then it can't. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying obviously it can be, but in terms of sort of significance and impact and significance, as I say, there's different scenarios where this policy allows for theoretically development in truly open countryside. This site is not that, in our opinion, although it's outside the settlement and therefore would be defined as countryside. But in terms of sort of its physical relationship to the settlement, with built form either side, purely because it's outside the framework, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be.
But you're saying therefore we've got to apply a higher test as required under EMV1 and EMV2, but you might not apply if it was in a completely rural area.
Oh, you would always apply it. You would have to apply it. Yeah.
I'm not sure I follow, because this is my point, is that under HOU4, the requirement is that there's no significant harm. And you've said there is no significant harm to the character and appearance of the area, and that it complies with policy HOU4, but that I have to look at EMV1 and EMV2, which talks about protect and conserve and enhance, which is a different test. And that is because it's not really in the countryside and it's adjacent to a settlement.
Yeah, I mean, this is, yeah, I mean, I don't think the application was refused on the basis of conflict. Let me just check.
It wasn't refused with, that's what I'm saying. It accords with HOU4. You've agreed that, and it's not referenced in the reasons for refusal. But HOU4 does look at character and appearance. Yeah, you've highlighted HOU4. That's when we look at contributions, which is slightly different.
So, yeah.
So, but obviously HOU4 is a relevant policy.
It's relevant insofar as obviously the test there is that, it shouldn't be significant harm to the character or setting of the settlement and the surrounding countryside. Obviously, we're looking more locally at the physical location relative to the immediate character there, whereas HAU 4 refers to, in my opinion, a wider setting of that settlement, whereas we're looking at a more local impact in terms of its visual impact.
So EMV1 and EMV2 is more about the local impact.
EMV2,
EMV2.
EMV2, yes.
But is that a higher bar, do you think then?
This council considers it is because they've refused it on that basis.
Are you okay? Thought maybe that it's something's triggered an allergy or something. Higher bar applied. Why can't you have the windows open? It's too noisy.
Okay.
Quite stuffy in here. Higher bar applied. Right, EMV2. Okay. Right, do you want to come back on any of the points about the policy, and then I just want to have a bit of a discussion about
Yes.
the character of the area.
If I may, please,
Yeah.
very briefly on policy. First of all, I won't go into this in any detail, but insofar as there is some different or higher test in EMV2, obviously we say we comply, but we'll come on to that. More substantively, as you rightly observed, I think, Madam, the council agrees there's compliance with HAU 4. That's not just because it's not in the reason for refusal, but it's also 8.8 of the Statement of Common Ground, where they expressly agree that, and that reflects the officer report. The most fundamental point I want to make, though, is this. One reads a lot in the cases about policies and plans pointing in different directions. And sometimes, obviously, you just simply have to try and make them balance against each other as appropriate. HAU 4 is different, though, because HAU 4 is a specific homegrown policy for rural exception sites in this district, which embraces these sorts of considerations, and it balances them internally within its four corners. And so this is actually the reflection of EMV 1 and 2 as they're intended to be applied to a rural exception scheme. And that is sufficiently covered by the language of reference to setting of the settlement. You could, if it wasn't for the difficulty the council was otherwise in with these policy points, you could quite easily see a council saying, well, this point about the terrace would reflect adversely on the setting of the settlement. It's obviously potentially covered, but they don't think it's a good point in the context of a target of showing significant harm to what you need to refuse a rural exception site, and that really should be the end of the reason to point. Obviously, I'm sure you'll move on to the specifics, and Mr. McCulloch, rather than me, will address those. But that's the policy observation for you.
Yeah, so I wanted to go on to talk about how would you describe the local distinctiveness of the area, and are there any detractors or positive elements? So if I hear from the council first.
Thank you. Yeah, so sort of as set out in the reports, the sort of the immediate locality there. Obviously, we're en route out of the settlement, and
Hang on, right, take me to where you're.
So the roundabout to the north.
No, take me to where you are referencing in your report,
Okay.
where you've
Just find
set
that
out
if
the
I
local
can.
distinctiveness. So I can follow it. I think it just comes under access and indicative layout. Or is there more in your appeal statement, maybe?
I don't believe there's significantly more in the appeal statement. So yes, so rather unhelpfully, the officer report's not numbered, so apologise for that.
No, it doesn't kind of have a section on character and appearance. As I say, it's under access and indicative layout, I think, is where we.
Yeah, so
I don't think there's really much. So it talks about the site and its surroundings.
Yes,
But yeah, I just wanted to know really what is the local distinctiveness that you are setting out?
yeah. So the sort of local distinctiveness there versus the proposed development, I guess, and existing in the settlement is along Cambridge Road as you exit Stretham. You have sort of pairs of semi-detached properties on the appeal side. Obviously, then that reduces down to a detached property, then our application site, and then sort of individual detached spacious properties. So you get a sense of that you are essentially leaving the settlement, and there is a sort of a transition from urban to rural as you sort of continue along out of the settlement. So it's considered that the terrace, which would be fairly substantial across the frontage of that site there, would be sort of incongruous to certainly the existing built form in that location, let alone the nature of built form, which reduces in density, reduces in sort of urban enclosure as you exit the settlement, and it's considered that is in conflict with the development plan then in that regard. And I think as an observation, obviously the original indicative layout that was submitted with the application, I appreciate that was some time ago now and has been superseded somewhat, but that original indicative layout indeed showed pairs of semi-detached dwellings, to my mind, across the frontage, set out sort of essentially in accordance with the pairs of semi-detached properties that but that was at a time when the application was pursuing a sort of continual fence across the front of
Yes,
this.
I remember that, yeah. Yeah, I think I have seen that one. As you say, there's been various plans, hasn't there? Okay, and is there any detractors? Like, is the A10 a detractor in terms of local distinctiveness, or what impact does that have on the character and appearance?
No, I don't consider it is. I think the built form in that location, obviously the A10 is, it is a busy road nonetheless. But I don't consider it, it has any sort of significant bearing on built form that, on this, whether this built form is acceptable or not, in my opinion.
Okay.
And I appreciate we're talking only indicatively at this stage, but I think we obviously have to form a view that in terms of the noise mitigation necessary, it does rely on a terracing.
Yeah, I mean, that's
properties.
one of my, like when we've covered this, that's one of the things I wanted to just clarify about that. But do you want to then come back on helping me with local distinctiveness? You want to respond? You got your, yeah.
So obviously, the village of Stretham has got as explained in the character assessment, has sort of grown organically over time, and our overall conclusion to the character of the area is that there is no unifying character at all, apart from the use of the village is obviously predominantly residential. The scale and massing is generally 2-story with a pitched roof, sometimes interspersed with 1.5 and 3-story properties. There is a variety of forms. There are terraces, semi-detached and detached houses, including a terrace which is about 180 metres just north of the site. In fact, 2 terraces just north of the site, about 180 metres. We calculate in a car about 12.5 seconds if you're going 30 miles an hour. Typically, the materials of the local area are brick in buff and red, occasionally painted or rendered. The roofs are typically pitched with grey slates and red tiles, and fenestration is typically smaller openings with a mixture of sash and casement windows. But there is no overarching form. We do go into some detail about how there's sort of the village core an expansion in the post-war and the sort of most recent developments, all of which have examples of detached, semi-detached and terraces from the heart of the village to the outer areas due to expansion, and even the sort of latest 21st century when viewed at oblique angles. Fair enough, when you look at them across the open spaces, they look individual. There is a variety of forms throughout the village.
Okay. Well, and I think you've outlined what you think the effects of the proposed development are on this character. So I probably don't need to hear any more. I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to that, just the fact about how that terrace, as it's proposed on those two illustrative plans, would affect that character.
Oh, we don't feel that a terrace would have any impact on the character of the immediate area or the wider area. As I said, there is a terrace that exists a little bit further up the road in a very short few moments if you're traveling by car. There are a number of ways that a terrace can be addressed, and we've taken a view from the examples from within the village. The sort of conservation area, SPD, states that the frontages are generally very flat with just porches on the front. This is an outline application. Our illustrative scheme could be produced with elevations which were either flat, very similar to that. It could also have bays to the front and gable ends and could be broken up in that way, if and that could, that will be tested at the reserved matter stage. Or you could have a scheme which is hidden behind a hedge, which is exactly identical to the properties opposite the scheme, or just to the south of the scheme, that's exactly the landscape arrangements to those. Or you could have a terrace which had a more stepped feel, which can also be seen within the village, and you'll probably see on your tour later, which can give the properties a sense of appearing more individual as you drive past, especially as when viewed at an oblique angle, as you would most likely be approaching the site in a vehicle. The western half of the site, we've obviously taken a very different approach, and there the scheme is viewed across the fields, across open space, from the few people that are probably walking on the public right of way. And there we've taken a slightly different approach to the scheme, more in keeping with maybe some of the other developments that have been coming forward recently.
Thank you. So did you want to come back on any of that?
Yeah, I think if I can just come back on HOU 4, I think it was, just very briefly, I don't want to come on to it too much, but obviously I appreciate we were wrestling with whether that is sort of, the primary policy and in terms of impacts, visual impacts, significant harm, etc. I think I just want to refer to policy EMV2, which sets out that all development will be designed to a high quality, complementing local distinctiveness. And it even goes so far in paragraph 2 of EMV2 to say that design which fails to have regard to local context, etc., will be refused. So obviously EMV2 does capture all developments as expressly set out there, but nonetheless, I thought I'd just mention that. In terms of comments, in terms of sort of obviously design, I think we've stated that we're sort of looking immediately locally here. I don't consider that the existing terraces are relative or related at all to this site that were mentioned there, some 100, 110, 120 meters away. Whilst I accept that, obviously with a terrace, I think the option there, an opportunity maybe to stagger those terraces, to sort of break those up, to maybe improve their sort of overall design. My only concern with that is obviously we've had a look at the noise impact assessments, and it does appear that the staggering that was shown seems to include more of those marginal compliance, marginal exceedance, or however you want to reference it, events where a number of plots actually didn't achieve anything other than sole or marginal compliance with the OAE. So
That'd be part of the balance, though, wouldn't it? In terms
that
of
would
when
be
you came
part-
to look at your
it-
reserve matters.
it would indeed, and I think, you know, we've sort of set out that we're considering the application in terms of the cumulative disbenefits against the sort of the benefits of the scheme. So I think in terms of sort of
And there wasn't any concern, was there, with the layout of the back of the site? I don't think.
no, because obviously it would be to a
It
degree
is just the
screened.
terrace, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Frontage. I think one of the points that I wanted to just pick up from your side was the point the council made about the transition from urban to rural, and that actually this is sort of, obviously I don't know for definite because I've not seen it, but that they're sort of, it's a transition so that you get a looser knit development. It does look a little bit like that from the block plan. They didn't really cover that point.
So what I was trying to explain before and can be seen in the character assessment is that there are a variety of building forms throughout not only the village core, but also in the later post-war expansion of the village, and then out onto the approach roads to the village. So as I sort of tried to highlight before, this is an approach road to Stretham village. Just north of here, there is a terrace, which is, in fact, there are two terraces just north. And when viewed at a oblique angle, they have sort of a compound effect. So I don't think it's fair to say that there's a transition and
Not a
all of the
transition.
properties on the approach to Stretham are all semi-detached or detached properties. I would say that there's a mixture across the entire village.
Okay.
Madam, can I just add that, and you'll see this on the site visit later today, but many of the examples of terraces are edge of settlement.
Okay.
Not this edge, but other edges of the settlement. Of course, originally the first terraces are all in the core area in the town centre. Well, I accept that, but subsequently, including the most recent forms of development that have come to this area, there've been terraces, as I say, on the edge or very near the edge. And I think there are some examples of that highlighted and flagged in Mr. McCulloch's report.
This is something. Okay, I don't have that printed, obviously, but that's fine. Page 27. Yeah. That's fine. So yeah, one of the things that I did want to try and see what the consensus was obviously it is an outline application. And as I've said, obviously all the plans that I've got before me are illustrative. But I think it's that from what I've heard today and what I've read, that the council considers that the constraints set out within the noise assessment means that the layout would require a terrace formation facing outwards. So is it agreed that whatever any reserve matters would have to have a frontage terrace? Is that agreed or not?
I think that if you're going to have two rows, then yes.
Yeah.
The front
So
one
it would have to be a terrace in order to get the mitigation.
for the gardens, yes.
Yes.
And the quiet facades.
So it's agreed that for the purposes of it, we would be looking at a terrace across the front. Because the other option was the fence, which everyone's agreed presumably is not acceptable in terms of, because you've moved away from that approach.
It's not part of our evidence. But
No. So even though, because obviously again, the description is for up to 19, and as we've seen with what the illustrative plans that I've got, one of those is for 17, one of them is for 19. But even with less properties, that would still be a terrace. That's what we're saying, isn't it? That's how I'm dealing with it, yeah. How does the terrace, the use of a terrace, does it in any way help with meeting the type of housing that was required? I haven't really looked at that in any detail because obviously it wasn't a matter of dispute.
But just to clarify, a terrace does have other benefits for passive house, for instance.
Okay,
You may notice on the passive house example, I think one of them is a terrace. And the advantages are that obviously you have less perimeter walls, so you have more walls which are party walls with less heat loss. So there are some advantages as well to the passive house design.
okay. And is there anything in terms of what you were trying to achieve in terms of a mix to meet an identified need? Because normally terrace properties are smaller.
But the terrace has no effect on the on the mix.
So you'd have been able to achieve that anyway, even with detached houses or
Yeah, in fact, we've
semi-detached?
got quite wide frontage to reflect this village. We've got sort of quite wide frontage properties with so it can be it has no effect on the mix whatsoever.
Okay. And would there be any opportunities for landscaping and mitigation? Because I think obviously there is some shown. Has that been given any consideration?
The answer is absolutely yes. That there's a more than wide enough area between the proposed terrace location and the road for a planting scheme that breaks things up. Have we devised one to support the illustrative scheme? No, we've not. But we're not talking about a terrace hard up on the road. It's
In terms of
set back.
visibility displays as well, that would still, because the illustrative ones have sort of like shown like trees or blobs as they do.
Yeah,
But presumably there's sufficient, I think, just depends which ones I look at, because
yeah, the visibility displays I think are all in the highway land,
yeah,
and so there's no issue about that at all.
what's your view on that? What weight do I give to that in terms of opportunity for mitigation?
Well, obviously, we've not had anything before us to sort of be able
No,
to
it's
really
a
assess
reserved
it, so it's
matter.
very difficult to give it weight, but certainly I would say that there would be an expectance for some landscaping across the frontage of the site there. Does appear to be some opportunities without conflicting with visibility, as you said.
So you agree that there is opportunity?
Yes, yeah, it does appear to be based on sort of indicative layouts.
And do you think that would perform any role in breaking up or softening the appearance of the terrace?
I think it would only really have an impact at sort of lower levels. You know, I don't think we'd want to see a total screening of any site because it would
No.
just form enclosure. But so I think you would still see roof line and obviously the upper parts of that terrace.
Yeah, Madam, can I say that again, I don't imagine it would be the intention to try and hide the
No.
terrace completely, and nor would that be good urban planning. But again, if you look at the illustrative layout plans, whether it's like the one with the flush terrace or the staggered terrace.
Yeah, I've got
You-
revision 08. I think that's the one the council made their decision on.
Yes, and then there's been a
And then I've got one which
subsequent
came with the
one, option
appeal.
4 Rev 00, which is the staggered
Yeah,
terrace. Obviously, there are lots of ways, as Mr. McCullough has explained, that you can articulate a terrace. You can have different coloured materials from one property to the next, just subtly different, so that it breaks up the general appearance. You can have different features, gable ends.
I mean, that corner bit, that bit where, because I think on all the examples, it shows it like then it carries on round the corner. Again, that's required, isn't it, for the mitigation?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is.
you couldn't have a break there.
No, you can't.
No, okay.
But these plans, can I just refer to a few aspects of them. As I say, I've already pointed out that to follow the building line from 44 through to 46, we've not set the terrace hard up against the road. You can see that there is quite a lot of space available, broadly akin to the area of the back gardens in broad brush terms. And at least the plan that I'm looking at has got, as well as the garden path routes at that side, it's also got a whole bunch of trees shown. So you could readily have a hedge that screens the bottom couple of meters, and then a series of trees planted along there, which help to break up and filter the upper bit. But also just to the south of the access point, there's an area which is kept essentially clear, and that you could readily have a broader planting arrangement for. It doesn't have to be exactly what's shown here, and that again would help to break up if you're coming into town.
Is that amenity space? Because I know on some of the iterations there was development on there, wasn't there? And then I think again, just as it's evolved with the noise, we've sort of taken that away.
Well, I think in the end, there's proximity to number 46 as well.
Yes,
to take into account. So it's not land that's going to be used for a proposed house. So it is available for planting, and that again would help to filter views as you're coming up from the south towards the properties that turn the corner. So I would respectfully suggest that firstly, there's nothing unacceptable about a terrace in this location. There is no local distinctiveness, and insofar as it's relevant, there are lots of terraces in this general location. And secondly, with appropriate facade treatment and design of the individual properties, plus at the ample opportunity that exists for planting to break things up and filter views, that there is no difficulty whatsoever, even if you were only looking at EMV2. But in any event, the key question is there significant harm to setting in terms of HOU4? And the council's already agreed that there isn't.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Anything else you want to add?
I think it was just the discussion there about the sort of southern area of what appears to be open space. I think we'd probably obviously need to be mindful that there would need to be some kind of sustainable urban drainage system.
Whenever you see a bit of spare ground,
yeah,
suds amenity space.
I don't quite know what scale that's likely to be, but obviously it's just
yeah, just to be aware of. Okay, that's fine. That was all my questions on character and appearance. So we need to cover off. Obviously, then we'll go on to talk about other matters. And we'll have to. I just need to understand what your points are around the obligations, I think, so I can just have a look at those over lunch, because I think what we'll do is have a break now and then give everyone time to have a break, have a bit of lunch, and I can look at that. I mean, have you got, because I don't think I've seen, oh, I might have missed, I didn't think I'd seen anything where there was a dispute about it.
What I've got here, which I can let you have now, are copies of the agreed section 106 agreement, the bilateral, which has been agreed with the council, which covers just the affordable housing matters and the section 106 obligation to cover that, which is agreed. There is also a unilateral undertaking which covers the request from the county council in relation to contributions. We only really saw their justification for those contributions in detail as when we received the comments that they came through, which was submitted as part of the appeal. So the third reason for refusal lists education, open space as elements requiring contributions.
Okay, yeah, education, libraries, is it?
Yes, the council dropped open space from the requirement, and the county council have added libraries in their submissions under the appeal. Now we have a unilateral undertaking which has been before the county council, and they've agreed the wording of, and it has a blue pencil clause in it, which we can sort of talk you through. in terms of the application of regulation 122.
So it's the library, is it the library that you've got the issue with then, is it? Or
And
was-
also the education, having set out where their education contributions come from and how they're justifying it. We've just had more of an opportunity to look at that.
Okay, and is that, so I've got their comments from March 2022, but was that updated? Because I know they then sent something in, just so I can be clear what I need to look at.
Yeah, they did provide comments in, as Chris has said, from the appeal process.
I don't think I printed them because I thought, oh, no one's disputing them, so.
I can get a copy of those.
I will have it. I've definitely seen it. Oh, I see. It's disconnected me from the internet. It's decided it doesn't want to do that anymore. Okay, I have seen it. I think it came in, as you say, it's a consultation response to the appeal. So I'll be able to have a look at that. But I just wondered whether it was any different. If you've got a printed copy, that would be helpful, just because I find it easier and I can annotate it then. And I can just double check how different it is to what's here. Yeah, that's fine. So if you can let me have a copy. But yeah, other than that, hopefully that we won't need too much longer, I don't think. I haven't got many more questions. I was just going to go through, I just wanted to be clear what the 5-year land supply position was, whether there's an accepted position on that. That's just in terms of whether I need to apply any balances
We
under
accept that they've
11D.
got a 5-year.
So there is one says no tilted balance under 11D.
It's not a tilted
No,
balance.
that's
case.
right. That's what I thought, but I just wanted to double check because sometimes things change. So that's fine. So we'll just summarize the benefits anyway. That's what I was just going to ask you to do. And then we can just go through the obligation, conditions and costs. So yeah, hopefully we won't need too much longer after lunch, I wouldn't have thought, just so people know where we are. So if we break now, how long do people want to have as a break? I don't need to go anywhere, so I'm self-sufficient, but if others need to go off 12, I was going to say 12:30, but I just mindful sometimes.
Yep,
people won't
happy
be-
for that, so long as it gives you enough time to read the two.
Well, I'm sure you'll take me through it anyway.
Well, Mr. Frost will.
Yeah, so if we break now and then we come back here at 12:30, that'll be good. Okay.
Which has been agreed, the wording which has been agreed with the county council.
Yeah.
It's in copy of the section 106.
That's fine. So that will still need to go electronically to the office because I don't have a means of electronically then getting it. So yeah, so if you just send a copy, so then that just goes on the electronic file, that would be great. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.